Okay, so I'm going to talk about some overcoming stuff this evening. It was great to hear Kim's testimony. Kim, you know me, right? Like, we know each other, right? I don't know what she's saying, but yeah, Kim, we went across with 6 other people across Australia, right? Yeah. So I think I need to turn that story into a talk one day, because it's one of the wildest experiences of my life. And it was documented, and it was insane, the stuff that happened on that trip. We took 6 Adelaide people across to the Perth outreach, and that drive, well, the drive should take, I think we planned it to take 2 or 3 days, and I think it took a lot longer. And it was seriously insane. I should tell those stories. But tonight we're just going to talk about a few things, and one of these thoughts was sort of in the gifts, just about what's important, what's not important, and a bit about accountability, awareness, and these kinds of things. So turn to Romans chapter 14. Romans chapter 14. When I was looking at this talk thoughts, there was one thing that came up, which was a politician, actually a former first lady, saying activism beyond hashtags. And I think there's a lot of, it's probably a common thing in this world, that there's a lot of talk of action, but there isn't much action in the world. So talking a little bit about our actions. So Romans chapter 14, verse 1. Receive him that is weak in the faith, but not for passing judgment. Hang on a second. I'm gonna switch to King James Version, actually. Receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to disputes over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, and he who is weak eats only vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Who are you to judge another's servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. One person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. So it's kind of talking here about, well, it says they're doubtful things, or you could say unimportant things in terms of salvation. And it's saying that how we're to handle these kinds of non-critical, unimportant things, but that might be important to each of us. But we may all have different ways of going about things, but that it's saying here, it's fine. Some people want to be vegetarians, some people want to celebrate certain days, and it's, if it's not actually causing stumbling blocks, and if it's not critical to salvation, then it says in verse 4, who are you to judge another's servant? Meaning, on these unimportant things, who are we to judge someone else's decisions and their relation and how it relates to their relationship with God? And it says there in verse 5, let each be fully convinced in his own mind. So it's actually saying it's more important that we can accept these things and move past them and be united in that sense. It's more important to be that way than to sort of all have the same opinion about everything and sort of all be monolithic and all be the same. And so, you know, there's all sorts of things that aren't important to our salvation, and things like, well, I already said, you know, you might say vegetarians. There's a whole movement now which says you only eat meat. So we have to leave the meat eating people to do their thing. I've heard of people that follow the Old Testament food laws. People believe in vaccinations. Other people don't believe in vaccinations. There's all sorts of things that they're just not important. And so we're instructed here how to handle these things. And so it's saying here that mention there about be fully convinced is, it's sort of, yeah, well, maybe you're on the side of one of these things where you're in the minority, but it's important that you, whatever decisions you make, that it doesn't affect your walk in the Lord, and that you're convinced in your own mind, there it says. So it's kind of like not wavering, and be confident in your decisions, and sort of, so that they're not part of who you are. They're not the core of who you are. You know, you've met those people who, they have this one thing, and that's like all they talk about, and that's their life. That's their passion, that one thing. And you know, obviously we're to have the Lord as our one passion. So how do you know the difference between one of these unimportant things and then something that's a fault? Because you know, a fault is a sin. Now, it's usually pretty obvious, I would say, these kinds of things. But we use the word, we use counsel, we use oversight. I think if you're in doubt of what's a real issue, a fault, and what isn't, it's probably not a critical issue, because it would be obvious if it is. And, you know, sometimes when we have disputes or something needs to be addressed, at the worst case, you address it, and then you say your piece, and then you move on. And then you can kind of get it off your chest and not be burdened by it. But obviously, we don't want to let these things hang on to us. Turn to Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. So it talks here, well, in verse 1, Galatians 6, brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. So this isn't talking about someone goes vegetarian and you feel sorry for them, and you got to restore them to that, you know, meat eating state. That's not what it's talking about here. This is, if you look into the word trespass, a falling away, a lapse. This is the original meaning of it. A slip, a false step, a sin. So this is a completely different thing to what we were just reading in Romans. We're told when these faults happen to help restore someone who has fallen into this state. And reading on, verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For each one shall bear his own load. So, a couple of things here. It's sort of talking about measuring ourselves and our own work against the word and against the Lord and against his instruction. And that when there's blessing out of that, to rejoice in it. And that we're kind of, in the end, we're responsible and accountable for our own works and our own decisions. And so sometimes we can compare ourselves to other people, And that's dangerous in two directions. One is we can actually create more limits for ourselves. Like if I'm not really shooting for the stars, if I'm kind of crawling along and quite happy to be fairly unproductive in the Lord, and then other people are looking at me thinking, wow, I can get away with that. You can limit yourself if you look at someone who isn't particularly that enthusiastic, and you can lower your own standards. Whereas if you line things up with the Lord, you'll be much more effective than if you look at other people. And also it works in the opposite direction. If there's certain people that sometimes are prolific in one area in the Lord, whatever it is, evangelism or whatever it is, and you could condemn yourself because you look at them and you think, I'm not that, I can't get there. So I just want to look at a couple of things here about that, and about how the Lord has created for each and every one of us a unique life for us. So in verse 4 there, it says, let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. So when you're looking to the Lord and looking for him to use you, you get blessed, and you get, you kind of get the plan from the Lord, and you respond to it, and then you execute the plan and you do these actions, and then you get blessed, and you get the spiritual uplift as a result of that. So the Lord has these things available for us, and we have this rejoicing that we get. And equally, as it's sort of said before, sometimes people can kind of ride on the coattails of other people in the Lord, and it just doesn't really work for that person. It doesn't really work to even as a fellowship, to come to a fellowship that is on fire and going well, but then this one person is just not really doing anything themselves. They're just sort of coming to that fellowship, and it might feel like they're getting the benefit, but they're not really. It can be very exciting to be amongst it, but you got to find your place. Like you said, Paul said, someone planted and someone watered, and there was different people chipping into the things that were going on. And that's the thing, isn't it? Each of us don't have to be executing the whole plan. We just have to execute our part in the plan, which is not as daunting. So if you find yourself wanting to be more involved, you just got to find that little part of the garden where you can do something. Maybe you're pulling out weeds, maybe you're watering, whatever it is, we can get involved. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. I had a bit of I had like a mini example of this in my own life recently, where I sort of realized I wasn't fully committing to something, and what it was is that, and I initiated it. So I can't remember what I saw, but 2 or 3 months ago, I saw some kind of pseudo-Christian ad. I don't even know what it was. I don't know if it was a TV ad or an internet ad or something, but it was from some Christian organization, and it just must have annoyed me. I don't remember what it said or anything, but certain things annoy me, like when it's very intellectual but they're just wrong. And so I just had to blast them an email. I didn't really blast them, but I was just like, hey, this isn't right. And it was sort of like just had a bit of a go there. And then this guy replies, and we were going back and forth for a bit. And at one point I said, is this a bot? Like, is this a artificial intelligence bot? Because it was so scripted. I was like, because we do these at work, and probably Chris does too. It's like, these days you could be exchanging with a robot. But he assured me that it wasn't a robot. But he certainly had chunks of text just to copy and paste in to any response he needed. And it was all, you know, the typical stuff that you would hear from religion. And anyway, so I initiated this thing, but I wasn't ready to invest the time to actually respond to all his chunks of his long emails every time. So I was just saying, you know, you're not lined up with the word and all this sort of stuff, but I wasn't going into depth. And so I kind of tried to shake him off. And then there's 2 months of nothing. And I said, look, stop emailing me. You're a business. I'm unsubscribing, because he wouldn't stop. Well, on Christmas Day, he emailed back, and I guess at that moment, that's when I realized, like, oh, I probably should take this seriously and expand on things a little more. So I spent pretty much most of Christmas Day emailing this guy, like, back and forth. I don't know why he was at his computer on Christmas Day, but anyway, so it's just a little example of how I wasn't committed at the start, and then I realized, oh, you know, I got to be accountable here. I started something. So anyway, don't know what will happen with him. He sort of seemed to, because I was answering everything with scriptures, he sort of ran out of ammo. And then I said, I want to, like, test it out for yourself. Give me your phone number. We'll pray over the phone and all that. And then he pulled the whole, I'm part of a business, I can't give you my phone number. Then I said, well, where do you live? And he said, what ended up being 100 miles from where Bobby lives in Washington State. Oh, I'll come and visit you. But I didn't say that because he has COVID. But anyway, we'll see what happens. I've been inviting him to Zoom meetings. But anyway, it's just an example of a second chance I got when I realized, you know, you got to be accountable and not just shooting off at the mouth like I started doing. Anyway, 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 4. And I think these chapters 12, 13, and 14 were very central to this back and forth I was having with this guy, because, you know, probably some of the most misunderstood chapters in the Bible for people, you know, people who don't want to, they've made up their mind about tongues, don't want to do tongues. And so they are pulling out stuff out of these chapters like nothing. And yet they won't pull out other things, like, you know, when I pray in an unknown tongue, my spirit prays, and things like that. And that's why I brought up the example, because, like, I realized on Christmas Day, like, all right, I got to commit to this. And it ended up being 20, 25 emails back and forth. And it was good. It was uplifting, because you realize you got to the point where he had nothing left, because I was explaining the context of all this stuff. And then that was it. And all he could say was, I can't go to a meeting because I've got something on at that time. So in verse 4, it says, now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are differences of ministries, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of workings, but it is the same God who works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man for profit. For to one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, to another the word of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another the gifts of healings by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another various kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But in all these works that one and the same Spirit, dividing to every man individually as he will. And so it's just saying that the Lord is going to use us, using the variety of gifts that come along with the Spirit. We all get these things. When we get the Spirit, it's a complete package, you know. But what he's trying to say here is that the workings of these things are going to be unique to every one of us. But there's sort of some just basic fundamental truths that come out of this, that like we will all be used. It might be in different ways, but we will all be used, especially if we're looking to be used. It won't be the same way. So don't compare yourselves to each other. Look to the Lord to be used. Sometimes I think we focus so much on that we all have the Spirit and it's the same Spirit and all that, which is true. But then we translate it to, so we should all have these similar lives and similar circumstances and similar outcomes. And that's not really lining up with what it says here. Well, obviously we have different roles in the assembly and all that, but we also have different different journeys, different testimonies, different stories that we can glorify God with. And that's part of his plan. I mean, the variety is key to being a testimony, so that we can be a testimony to the world that, you know, that resonates with different people, that they can see in the lives of people in the church something that pertains to them. So we're all equal, but there isn't necessarily equality in the different ways, the different paths that the Lord is going to guide us through. And the trick is really each of every one of us to realize that, adjust your expectations instead of looking at everyone else and saying, that's what I expect. You know, realize the Lord has his own unique plan for you. And that's exciting. You know, you're going to have your own testimony, your own amazing stories to tell, which is really good at the moment with the European conventions, the camps going on YouTube at the moment. You just hear all this variety and all these unique stories, which are amazing. So how do we ensure that we're responding to the Lord's calling? It's accountability. So having seen the diversities of the things that are going to happen to us, and realizing that we can't just rely on, you know, well, what happens for this person or that person over there, I'm just going to take that. Then it becomes sort of accountability, that kind of thing, to realize that you're going to have to be accountable for your decisions, be accountable for looking to the Lord, being accountable for finding out what his plan is for you. And there was a talk by, I think it's Pastor Scott Noble, I think from Geelong. And I watched his talk from yesterday or the day before. It was really good. And he sort of went into some things about his personal life and his battles with different things. And he likened issues that you have in your walk to, he said that losing a leg isn't the only thing that's going to stop you walking. It could be like a little pain or a little twinge or a little injury, and that can stop you walking. So he's talking about noticing things that could become a big issue later. And it was a really good talk, and I encourage you to look it up. But yeah, he talked about noticing things, and he was sort of talking about, he talked about being in a cave, figuratively, and how to get out of that cave and all these things. And, you know, some pretty dark times. And really, I took out what he said was just that he had to still be accountable, even though it was some pretty dark times, and to find out what was going on and to look to the Lord for the victory. And so there's some pretty pretty nasty things that, you know, like you said, it may not be that you lost your leg and that's why you're not walking anymore. It could be something pretty minor. And there's sort of some vicious things that we have to deal with that sometimes it can seem nothing and other times it's something. And I got an example here. This is close to home. So I saw this story quite a while ago and I've been wanting to use it in the talk, but it just didn't work. This is, how do I hold this up? Can you see it up there or no? This is a fish. Looks pretty harmless, right? Just harmless little fish. Well, let me tell you about this fish. This is the northern snakehead. You can Google it, and it was found in Georgia a year ago for the first time, and it's horrified the Georgia Department of Natural Resources because it's very invasive, and I'll tell you why in a second, but someone found it in Gwinnett County, a couple of counties over from here. And first time it's been found in Georgia, and they say, as soon as you find this fish, the northern snakehead, kill it and freeze it and then give it to the authorities. Now this fish here can grow to 3 feet in length, and it can breathe air for days, several days at a time, and it can just wriggle over land and go to other water bodies and then live there for a while and then decide to go on a jaunt for another few days. So it can, yes, it can literally breathe air, and it's the way its heart is, I think it is. Its heart permits breathing underwater and breathing out of the water. And ever since I saw that story, I thought, like, you can see the dramatic headline here, kill it immediately. So what struck me about this story is it's just like an emergency. It's like, see this fish, kill it, because it's going to take over the state and all this. And sometimes with our issues, like Pastor, I think it's Pastor Scott, I don't know, because there's another brother. But you know, what you're saying is, like, when you see certain things in your walk, maybe you spot it early and maybe you don't, but these things can be vicious and really destructive in our walk. And you know, isn't it funny how the things that are most destructive to the spirit are often things that are just like really brutal and vicious and not fragile at all? Like this fish, you know, it's probably really hard to kill. Probably, it certainly can live on its own fine, walking around on land. And so you kind of have to be ruthless with things in your life that you know could become issues at some point or already are issues. And another example is I spent a lot of time well, not a lot of time, but one of my main projects in the last year has been in Portland, Oregon. And that is a interesting city, I can tell you that. It's like, yeah, anyway, these things go up on YouTube, so which changes my talks a lot of the time. But anyway, Portland, so I was going there before COVID sometimes, and you know, this year they had a lot of protests, and since they're one of the cities that, you know, has a certain culture, they certainly let, you know, protests, they quite happy for certain protests to go on, but unfortunately the people that were doing the protesting this year were very extreme, both in their actions. You know, I think there was murders, but, you know, just throwing rocks and bombs and stuff at police. And I think they were called the Pacific Northwest Youth Liberation Front. You know, wanted abolition of all police everywhere, all prisons shut down, and, you know, very, very strong demands. And, you know, at the start, when they started protesting, it was like, okay. And the city just let it happen. And then where it ended up months later was, because these people out there for months, and they changed the city, and everyone I was working with there was saying, like, they can't work downtown anymore. It's too dangerous. And, I think the mayor's building was getting trashed. And anyway, it just got such a bad problem that it was out of control, and they couldn't really fix it. I don't even know what's happening there the last 3-4 months, but it was just really bad. And it's just because in the end, the officials and the mayor and all that, who probably shared some of their beliefs, were in the end just completely against the protests and saying, like, you're helping Trump get reelected, stop it, and it was just this complete 180. And that's because they let that problem fester. And trying not to be, obviously, take a side. I'm just trying to describe to you what happened, but it was that bad that people who were supposedly on the same side were enemies in the end. So we have to, the point is, we have to be careful what we let start in our lives. Be smart, be wise according to the word. And verse of the day. Okay. It's one of your notifications. So be wise. Let's try and finish up in 1 Peter chapter 1. This talk turned out to be a couple of scriptures at the start and then a lot of examples. I got one more example. 1 Peter chapter 1. And the last example about being accountable is another news article I saw, which said, man hospitalized after downing energy drink calls for tighter regulations. Now, I know some of us in here probably drink energy drinks, but they're not all equal. There's some that are more toxic than others. And I just thought, some of those things are pretty dodgy, those energy drinks. And I just thought it was interesting. This guy drank one and then wanted the whole system changed for him because it had a bad reaction with him. He probably nearly died. His heart rates went up to 190. And my point is, just because something is legal, something you can go down the shop and buy, doesn't mean it's good for you. You still have to think. You still have to say, is this good for me? Should I drink this? Should I eat this? And, sometimes we all in this society become a little bit, we just rely on the regulations, which is definitely not something you want to do in the FDA arena. But we just, it's for sale down there. It's legal, so it can't be that bad. And yet there's a lot of bad stuff. So we have to be accountable. And it's just the same thing in the Lord is, and it's sort of like all things are, forgetting it, the one. All things are okay. What is it? Lawful, yeah. But not all things are actually good for us. So, we have to use wisdom and have to be accountable to ourselves. And even some of the nuanced things, it might be this person in the Lord can do it. You think of one of the things is music that comes up. I think music's probably generally just a personal thing, but music can be a real stumbling block for some people. But to someone else, the same music might be fine. I think of Alice's testimony. So we have to be accountable to our own walk and remember that first verse I mentioned? It said, like, let everyone be convinced of what they need to do with their relationship with God. So 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit, in sincere love of the brethren, love one another fervently with a pure heart, having been born again, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible, through the word of God, which lives and abides forever, because all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man as the flower of the grass. The grass withers and its flower falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Now this is the word which by the gospel was preached to you. And so, really this verse just saying, we've talked about a lot of how we overcome in the Lord, how we figure out different things, maybe it's called a gray area, things like that. But in the end, we're just trying to get through this life by minimizing the flesh, doing the things we have to do in that area, but really living in the Spirit and just forging ahead in the Spirit. And, that's what it really says here is all flesh is as grass. So none of this is meant to be about really putting too much stock and putting too much investment in our natural lives, but following this great pure, it says here, that our souls have been purified in obeying the truth by the Holy Spirit. So I just like those verses that we just read because it just sort of simplifies things, and it talks about the purity. And if you focus on the purity that the Lord's given us, it can guide your decisions and help you make wiser decisions in the Lord. And so we just need to keep dwelling on those things and keep the word alive in our lives every day, having it on our heart, so that when all these decisions come up, that we can do the right spiritual thing. So we'll leave it there.